Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bob Gorley. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of OODA LLC, and here with Matt DeVoe, our Chief Executive Officer of OODA. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see everybody and be able to pull off a small event here towards the end of what has been a very crazy year.
Yeah, I think it is going to be small but impactful. We've got some great brains who are going to be giving us some thoughts and observations on their experiences, and I really look forward to this. I'd like to start with some admin notes for everybody. 8 months into the pandemic, all of us are familiar with the Zoom interface. I did just want to mention one brief tip. I think you may want to click on the view button in the top right corner and you pick speaker view. I think you'll get more out of it as we do our panels if you do that. Also, we have enabled both the chat and Q&A functions of Zoom. In the chat, please introduce yourself. It's a tight-knit community, and it'd be good hearing from you. And it'd be great if you let folks know who you are and what you do and what your interests are via the chat. You can also use the chat to interact with any of the presenters, of course. But let me mention the Q&A function. We selected the features of Q&A that will let anybody ask any question, and you can see the questions that others are asking. You can also upvote questions. If somebody asked a question that you really think is important to be answered by a panelist or Matt or I, enter the Q&A and then click on the upvote if you see a question you want answered. A couple other admin notes. We are recording these sessions. We will make some of the recordings available to members after the event. Let me see. Yeah, so we talked Q&A, chat, recording, our sponsors. We really want to thank our sponsors. As all of you know, I think we had originally planned an in-person meeting on 19 March. The pandemic was starting to heat up. We had to eventually postpone for an extended period of time. Through that all, the sponsors of that event stuck with us and said, as soon as we're coming back in person, they're going to be there for us and sponsor our next in-person event. And, we also want to show them a lot of love in these virtual sessions too. So thanks to our sponsors. A key one, Centripetal Networks. Thank you very much, Centripetal, for your sponsorship and support. It really helps with events like this and the other things we do at OODA Loop. Data Defense Solutions. Data Defense Solutions was an early sponsor and a good supporter, and really want to thank them. Quintessence Labs, we sought out as a sponsor because they have perhaps one of the most interesting and disruptive technologies. They're leveraging quantum effects, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. And I just wanted to give an early personal thanks to Quintessence Labs sponsorships. And Percipient AI. Percipient's an interesting company for a lot of reasons. One is they're using artificial intelligence in pursuit of important objectives in very ethical ways. And they're not afraid to support national security missions the way that we saw some people backing away from. So thanks, Percipient, for your sponsorship. Other sponsors include Garrison, and we really appreciate Garrison's support. Garrison has a unique technology for defending networks by separation. So really appreciate them. More on sponsors later. As before we get into the operating environment that Matt and I will discuss, I want to give you a brief verbal overview of the agenda. The agenda, as you'll see in your calendar invite, is we're going to discuss some of the key mega trends and news and analysis of today that we think will help fuel your operational decisions. We'll then have a panel that starts at 1:30 Eastern on evaluating cybersecurity, and Matt will bring together a panel of thought leaders that include Masha Sadova of Elevate Security, Stephen Rogers of Centripetal Networks, and Bryson Bort, the CEO of Scythe. After that, I'll help moderate a panel of national security and technology thought leaders and decision makers on the national strategy for critical and emerging technologies. That panel will start at 2:15, end at 3. It includes Matt Turpin, who came out of, he was a director at the National Security Council. He's now at Palantir. Jim Miller, right now a senior fellow with Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab. He's a former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. And Dr. Melissa Flagg, a senior fellow at the Center for Security and Emerging Technology. She was also in DoD RDNA, RDNA. And is well versed in all of these topics of critical and emerging technologies. After that, we have selected 4 members to give us some very quick expert context on items of key interest, including OODA Loop member Junaid Islam on 5G. He's with the 5G consortium, and he'll talk about both functionality and security of 5G. Vikram Sharma, who's going to talk about quantum effects. He is the CEO of Quintessence Labs. He has a PhD in physics, but also a Stanford business degree, and really knows how to express these complex things in plain English. Mark Weatherford will be addressing an interesting topic that we pulled from him in our OODAcast, which is how can cybersecurity professionals and other career professionals help lead corporate boards to the right conclusions and methodologies? How can you be a leader of your corporate board as a CISO or CIO or CTO? We've also asked Balan Ayar to discuss with us his approach to optimizing humans and machines on critical missions in the age of AI. And then following that, Matt and I will come back for a wrap up around 4 p.m. That's a high level overview of the agenda. So with that, let me take a deep breath and say, Matt, let's talk about the operating environment that we're all in. I want to start by saying, we do a lot of research and publication at OODA Loop, and a lot of that is based on analysts who are producing content for us. A lot of it Matt and I write ourselves. A lot of it is informed by things Matt and I are doing in the marketplace, whether cybersecurity assessments or due diligence assessments, or speaking at events, attending other events. So we try to stay grounded. And but the most important thing that keeps us grounded is your input. So please, as I talk about some of these topics, as Matt and I talk about these topics, give us your input. You can give us your instantaneous input via the Q&A or the chat. You can give us input and feedback later, but really would appreciate your comments. To start with, we've selected a group of topics that was based largely on how many views these subjects are getting on our website. What is in high demand by our readers? For example, over the last 90 days, a very high demand topic, high interest topic is ransomware attacks. This includes whenever we write about ransomware attacks against cities, against school systems, against businesses, it's getting a lot of attention. In September, we were writing about something called a RDDoS, a ransomware DDoS attack, which was widely seen and written about in the security community. We're now starting to see some indications of a resurgence of that. But ransomware in general, hot topic, and given the fact that ransomware is generating money, it's reasonable to expect it will continue to evolve in seriousness and continue to be a big threat. Whenever we write about cybersecurity in government, it gets a lot of attention. One of the most interesting pieces and most highly read pieces was by a CIO in government. He is a CIO at the Health and Human Services, writing about the art of war, Sun Tzu's art of war, and how it applies to cybersecurity in government. A well-done piece. Another very popular piece was our write-up on our report of deception in cybersecurity. This special report is free for all OODA Loop members, so please check it out. This report captures our views of the deception in cybersecurity market, as well as the companies that are providing capabilities into that market, and then best practices for implementing and selecting these firms. Another high interest topic was our report on DARPA's Alpha Dogfight. This is the study a 3-year study and program, an experiment where DARPA was able to demonstrate capabilities of AI against some of the best Air Force fighter pilots in simulated air-to-air combat. Another high interest topic was the criminal syndicate group, the Sinaloa cartel, spreading out, branching out to produce meth labs in Europe to produce meth for new markets. Other hot topics included how government does cybersecurity, how government does their protection of critical emerging technologies. And another popular one was one I had produced on my perspectives of technology debt in M&A. Matt, those were some of the hot topics over the last 30 to 90 days. Comments on that? Anything you see in common between all of these pieces?
Yeah, I think the most common obvious theme is that of technology, right? We're seeing technology emerge as a central thread in just about every aspect of security, national security, innovation, enterprise operations, et cetera. So I think that's one interesting common thread that we can derive. The importance of building upon innovation, continuing to innovate, and the requirements to try and keep that innovation secure, right? Appropriate dialogue around security as part of the early discussions associated with these technologies, or at least in how to deal with the technology risks of what we've already deployed. Interestingly, even the cartel story had a technology angle to it, in that the only reason that law enforcement apparatus was able to roll up a lot of those meth labs was because of disruption of a secure chat system that was being used by the criminals that allowed them to gather the intelligence. So it definitely an interesting theme. We've seen it throughout the pandemic. We saw it in our lives prior to the pandemic, and is certainly one of the things that's going to be top on our radar screen going into 2021 is the underlying role of technology in all of these threads.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. So any other thoughts about these stories and what it may mean for us? I mean, you mentioned the technology thread, that's for sure. I mean, one thing that's clear to me is that the bad guys haven't stopped trying to gain advantage, and we defenders are going to have a tough job to do for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. There's, a sub thread, especially as it relates to cybersecurity around ROI. We did some very popular pieces this year interviewing CISOs about how do they seek security alpha? That is, how do they deploy dollars that give them disproportionate value from a cyber defense perspective? So, the race is on to identify those strategies, those technologies, those approaches that we can use that allow us to best secure our infrastructure, but are cost effective. I think that was a lot of the appeal as well with the deception in cyber. We did several interesting stories on that prior to issuing what was kind of our first unique research report, because of the disproportionate impact we were seeing within our client base. Here were technologies that they could deploy that were allowing them to, spend $1 on defense that cost the attacker a lot more than $1 on offense. So that's going to continue to be another underlying business challenge, is how do we ensure that we're, deploying these technologies, building these technologies, or even innovating in a way that brings us a good ROI on the investments that we're making.
Great, thanks. Matt, in all, I'd like to shift a little bit to discussion of our OODAcast series. We started this series as the pandemic was heating up, as a way to continue dialogue with the community and extract lessons learned from people in our network who have interesting experiences and backgrounds to share. In looking over the data, I thought I'd share with everyone. Some of these are very popular. In fact, if you look at YouTube views, for example, John Robb's OODAcast is really dominating. And a couple others in the top 10 list include Scott McNeely's. Everybody knows Scott. Scott's going to join us today, I hope. Carmen Medina, a director of analysis at CIA, who is an author and a continued thinker and thought leader on how analysis is done. Robert Fink, a world-class engineer with Palantir, is another popular one. Chet Richards, who wrote the book Certain to Win, documenting John Boyd's approaches and methodologies from the OODA loop and how they translate to business. is another popular one, as was Jane Malia's review on quantum effects. Those were some of the top OODAcasts. Now you can also look at the amount of traffic that came to the OODA Loop site because of the OODAcast. And interesting there, near the top of the list was Gary Harrington, a very interesting special forces operator, and then a CIA operator with direct mission experience, who I think had a lot of lessons for business professionals. Those were a few of the top ones. I wanted to say we wrote up the first 40 of those and have a special report on that kind of will give you a directory of all of the OODAcasts, so you can dive deeper into any that meet your interest. But I wanted to ask Matt, as you sit through these and do these interviews and watch them, have you seen common themes develop from the interviewees that we invite on?
Yeah, I certainly have. And part of that is serendipity, and part of that is by design and kind of how we drive the interviews. But first off, I would encourage folks, there's just some fascinating insight. When you think about somebody like Chet Richards, to use the Hamilton analogy of being in the room where it happened, he was at the happy hours where it happened. He was on the phone with John Boyd. Obviously, we have a huge affinity for John Boyd in the OODA loop and decision-making construct. So, incredibly insightful. Or somebody like Kevin Roberts, who, operated as a CEO over the period of 30 years, helping some of the biggest brands in the world establish their go-to-market strategies and their brand strategies, and just tremendous insights from content like that. By way of overall thematics, I think one thing that was very humbling for me, we've had a very diverse group of folks that have participated in the OODAcast, and the diversity of the expertise, I think, is a strength for the overall community, and a lot of very successful people. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was understanding their path to success and recognizing that there's no one true path. We like to think that there's some sort of definitive ladder or mode that you go through in order to achieve the success. And what they demonstrated, what it was a lot of hard work, a lot of being able to take risks on their view of the future, a lot of very kind of keen decision making that allowed for their success. So I found that to be very interesting and inspiring. We really try and get out of them their understanding and lesson learned for how they make decisions, especially high consequence decisions, and frameworks that they use to understand the world. It's one thing to be able to make a decision. It's another thing to have a framework by which you're understanding the world to drive those decisions. So I think that's very insightful. And we seem to get, again, just a great variety of answers in how people have decoded, deciphered, and made decisions in a very interesting world. The ability to use those frameworks to anticipate surprise and use that for market advantage, for innovation, or from a national security perspective. And then when you can't anticipate surprise, how to deal with the adapting to surprise. What do you do when something catches you off guard, and how do you continue to make good decision making? I really found it insightful when I talked with Kevin Roberts, and he talked about, everyone keeps talking about the new normal and the return to normal, and his feeling was there is no new normal. The world is so dynamic that change is the new normal, that rapid pace of innovation is the new normal. There's no going back, there's no reverting. There is just developing the resiliency to deal with that constant change. Technology, obviously a key thematic. We had some great technologists that we've interviewed as well, understanding the risks associated with technology, but also the opportunity. We're going to go through another great period of innovation. And then the role that innovation plays. If you're interested in emerging technology topics, we covered cybersecurity, we covered AI, we covered quantum computing, data science, a whole host of very compelling technology issues. So also, again, a thematic, the role that technology is going to play. This is a fun series. If there are folks that would like to be interviewed, by all means, reach out to us. We're going to be continuing to push this content out through 2021 for certain.
Let's transition again, and for the next, say, 10 minutes, review some of the topics that are, we think will be front of mind for a lot of decision makers over the next few months. One, the first, COVID-19. We've all been deeply involved in this since March. The status today, there's a surge in cases underway, unfortunately, globally, including here in the US, and it is going to cause action, including more lockdowns. But there's some bright spots. Two vaccines are very close to final approval, one from Pfizer, one from Moderna. Others are in the works, but it seems like these two will be the first that will eventually be widely available. And I think that's obviously a positive note. There's also a lot of progress in testing, including announcements yesterday of a new rapid test that costs less than $50 that can be prescribed and taken at home. And that cost will continue to drop. There are more positive things like this. There is research that indicates that virus immunity could last for a long time. Now, those are the positives. The negatives, really, it's just overwhelming the suffering that this is causing, the deaths, the amount of cases that are up, and this could be a very bad final few weeks of the year, frankly. A couple other trends. Bill Gates said it well at a New York Times event yesterday. He said that he believes there's been a lot of permanent change, and then his gut feel and estimate is that after COVID is over 50% of travel will never come back. We've gotten used to doing things remotely by technology. And his gut feel was also that even after COVID is gone, about 30% of the days in office will go away. People are used to working remotely and differently. So it just underscores these points that Matt was mentioning about hacking your way into the future. So there is this, we shouldn't think new normal. There is new. We have all, as cybersecurity professionals, seen a shift in adversary behaviors during the COVID crisis, including, of course, shifting their social engineering attacks to have themes around the virus and around fear of pandemics, but also shifting technology and shifting strategies as people went to work from home. I think businesses need to be prepared for additional shifts as we move away from the pandemic. The bad guys have really made it clear that they're not going away. Let me keep moving forward here as we say, just a second here. I want to talk briefly about the state of the U.S. critical infrastructure protection. All of us have seen over the last few weeks the turmoil in places like Department of Defense as senior leaders are fired or resign. Office of Director of National Intelligence has had a lot of preeminent people leave over the last 3 or 4 months. And the CISA, the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, it started with some turmoil and pressure right after the election. And now we see that Brian Krebs was forced out. Chris Krebs, you're right. Brian Ware was asked to leave just a few days before. Now, to me, there's no way of sugarcoating this. This is not a good thing. But there are some trends to watch for now. And I think as for what happens next, I want to ask your views on this, Matt. And here's where me being a continuous optimist sometimes causes me to be a little bit naive. And the optimist in me is saying that our nation is going to come out of this better, and our cybersecurity community is actually going to come out of this better. When I'm trying to look for the right analogy here, but this did not strike down the cybersecurity community. This did not strike down the election security community. It caused some turmoil and some very brief disruption. But I think the cybersecurity community is going to come together so strongly, and it's going to take this moment to come out of this in a much more influential way. I think the community is going to rally around Chris Krebs and the great work he did. And same with Brian Ware and the other champions there. And I think any hostile nation that thinks we are weaker now because of this is going to be in for a surprise. I believe that this has not weakened us. And look at it this way. Perhaps the greatest insider threat ever just attacked our critical infrastructure, and it's not going to have that big of an effect. It's too early to say what the real effect is here, but that was just some rambling thoughts. And I really want to get us all thinking about how can we come together and be stronger because of this, and how do we continue to collaborate and coordinate and share lessons learned and help defend our critical infrastructures. So some personal views there. Matt, what are your thoughts on the Brian Ware and Chris Krebs and CISA situation?
I think they did a fantastic job, Chris and Brian, both Chris in particular, by ensuring that cybersecurity was not a political issue. I think you and I have both operated in the same domain. I've operated with Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, because the topics that we're dealing with are so essential to our national security. So I think the one thing that we need to do as a community is kind of take this lump and realize that it's temporary, and continue to pursue cybersecurity in the national interest, in our corporate interests, et cetera. And one of my call to arms, especially from a cybersecurity perspective, is it's time to start adapting those approaches to other problems in society as well. We are going to reach a period in the next 10 years where we have to go through a massive modernization, a massive adoption of innovation within our government, within our society. And I think the cybersecurity community can help drive that as being kind of a nonpartisan way to advance. On the negative side, we definitely have a reckoning with regards to understanding the role that social media is playing, that influence operations are playing. It seems we get one issue under control and another pops up, and the inevitable game of whack-a-mole. So we need to be thinking a little bit more about the proactive measures to put in place. But I continue to be an optimist. It's discouraging to see such a critical topic as election security be politicized, but not unexpected given the current political dynamic, and is something I'm hoping we can rapidly move past.
All right. A couple other comments before we transition to your panel, Matt. One, I have seen indications of, we all need to be thinking through what will it be like as we shift to the new administration. The general sense I'm getting from a lot of people around the transition is it looks like there's more of a return to process for most levels of policymaking. Now, it doesn't mean there was no process in the last administration. There was a lot of interagency process and communication and collaboration and coordination, but still the leadership did have an effect. Now there's a transition, and I think we will see even more of a return to process and procedure and normal process. I also think we will see more continued push for automation and transformation of our government agencies, and more encouragement from the White House to do things like help modernize our national infrastructure through the use of technology. I think we'll see more investment in capabilities like AI, quantum computing, and other foundational infrastructure. With that, I want to say, before transitioning to your panel, Matt, the quantum computing, artificial intelligence, space technology, 5G, mobility, cloud computing, IoT, we track all these things at OODA Loop. We try to look at the status of these technologies and then where they're going in the near future. And we try to do that from a perspective of the so what. What does a business executive need to know about these and other technologies like cryptocurrencies and blockchain, automation, robotics? It's getting hard to understand the status of these things. It's almost impossible to predict the future, but we can make linear projections. The even harder part is now making projections on how these many different trends will interact with each other in the near future. But we take that as a task, and we try to do this. For the rest of today, we're going to dive into two major topics, cybersecurity, which will touch on many of these different trends, and also critical technologies from a standpoint of national security, including how to protect those. Before doing so, I wanted to ask Matt, do you have a favorite one of these technologies that you think people ought to be tracking, and comments on any of them?
Well, I think you should be tracking them all. The one I think is going to be most disruptive in 2021, I think I would probably put in the cryptocurrency kind of blockchain domain. I definitely feel like we've established some clear momentum there. Obviously, yeah, AI and quantum and other technologies are interesting, but probably the most probable how we do business over the next year, I would put in the blockchain category.
Yeah, I'm wondering, maybe we should return to this at the end of this event, because after we hear Junaid talk, we may say 5G is the most impactful as it's being rolled out this year. After we hear Vikram talk, we may say quantum computing and quantum effects is the most impactful. And after we hear Balan, we may say, oh no, AI is going to be what really does it for us. But really, it may end up being a convergence of all of these together. And I think that's the important thing to keep tracking.